Again, I think we're very fortunate to have with us Dr. Jim Sheehan, a social worker and family therapist. He's held senior social work positions in child protection and child, adolescent and mental health before being appointed Director of Family Therapy Training at the Mater in 1991, at which he remained until 2012. He is a part-time professor of family therapy and systematic practice in university in Oslo, and he's worked extensively with adult individuals, couples and children. He's frequently been called to appear as an expert witness before the Irish courts in both childcare and family law proceedings. So, Jim, with great pleasure, could I ask you to present?
Chairperson, I first of all want to thank you very much for this kind invitation to be here and to make a small contribution to the work of the convention this weekend. What the other speakers said about the legal area is absolutely true for my contribution to the psychological area. The paper I'm going to present is very brief, it is very limited in its scope, and is really just, as Jerry Durkin said, putting a toe in the water. But what I'm trying to do is to give some flavour of where I think some of the evidence lies at this moment in time with respect to the question about how do children and adolescents fare growing up in the context of being cared for by gay or lesbian parents. The remarks and the questions to which they respond that I want to deal with today are made from the perspective of a mental health professional, a social worker and family therapist, whose attention has been focused on the well-being of what I might broadly refer to as units of intimate belonging, which are more usually defined as families, couples and marriages. This attention, and the position from which I speak, has not simply been focused on the well-being of these units themselves, but also on the well-being of children, adolescents, adults and their relationships. Our dialogue in the Constitutional Convention this weekend exists in an imaginative space that invites us to consider what might be the case for our society should the state make provision in some way for same-sex marriage. Out of the myriad of questions that arise from our theme, I'll confine myself to a few questions that I believe are central to the consideration of the theme. These questions are focused on the well-being of children and adolescents, and I summarise these questions as follows. What does the current state of professional knowledge tell us about the consequences for child and adolescent development of growing up in families headed by gay or lesbian parents? What does the current state of professional knowledge tell us about any deficits that might arise in child and adolescent development from growing up in a family where there isn't both a mother and father present? And finally, to what extent can we rely on scientific research findings that form the basis of professional knowledge to guide us in our thinking? Put differently, what are the limits of what we can expect from scientific research in the face of our questions regarding the desirability or otherwise of same-sex marriage when we adopt a child-focused and adolescent-focused lens? These three questions are clearly related. In addressing them, I will draw heavily on the American Psychological Association publication, which includes an evaluative summary of research findings on lesbian mothers, gay fathers and their children. While the publication in question is the outcome of the joint work of a number of committees in the association, the summary was drawn together for the association by somebody called Charlotte Patterson, who has authored or co-authored 16 of the 150 studies and papers reviewed in the summary. The date of the most recent publication reviewed was 2005, and the language in which all the papers studied were published was English. However, the total volume of literature examined includes studies conducted in North America, Australia, the United Kingdom, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The summary is evaluative in the sense that it attempts to assess the contribution of each of the studies to an emerging picture of the area as a whole, as well as to state as clearly as possible what this emerging picture looks like at a moment in time. I draw on this source because of the authority of the American Psychological Association with a range of human science disciplines in proposing what counts as professional knowledge in relevant areas at a moment in time. Such authority, of course, is never without contest. That said, I will begin this brief contribution with the first and third questions mentioned above and conclude with a consideration of the second question. It's worth noting that the place of science and scientific discourse in most Western societies has risen dramatically since 1937, when our Constitution was framed. If science entered into the making of our 1937 Constitution, which it certainly did, it did so chiefly as political science. Those sections of the Constitution dealing with marriage and family were more likely to have been responsive to a mixture of relatively uncontested religious belief and cultural commitment than to any specific research findings from the human sciences. Yet for all its gradual development of every facet of Irish society, the impact of scientific discourse on our understanding of marriage and family life, child and adolescent development, etc., is of relatively recent origin. Despite the relatively recent origin of this impact, however, it still makes sense to us to inquire about the levels of scientific support attaching to any belief or assertion we might make about the area in question. If we take the question of the impact of gay and lesbian parenting on child and adolescent development, we can safely say that there is no significant body of scientific research relating to this question within an Irish context. This is hardly surprising, given that the recognition of gay and lesbian parenting in Ireland does not have a long history. Having said this, however, the website irishhealth.com announced in February 2013 the results of what they suggest is the first study of gay parents in Ireland. The study is reported as commissioned by LBGT Diversity and carried out by Dr. Jane Pillinger and Paula Fagan. The study reported on the experiences of 153 LGBT people who are already parents to 272 children and 170 others who were attempting to become parents. The study reported upon the pathways to parenthood of the participants, their experience of maternity services, their view of their children's level of received bullying at school, as well as providing information about the number of children in the sample without a legal relationship to one of the parents responsible for their care on a day-to-day basis. The website report makes no reference to a likely publication date or professional arena in which the research might be published. This, however, in no way takes from the immense value of the piece of work as the first study of its kind in Ireland. When we move across the Irish Sea in both directions, we find a significantly greater body of research emerging from the UK and North American contexts. Notwithstanding this immense disparity from the Irish context, the most recent summary of the research in this area by the American Psychological Association in 2006 suggests that while research on lesbian and gay parents and their children is, as they quote, no longer new, reported studies in the area go back to the 1970s, it is still what they describe limited in extent. During the course of this evaluation, the summary's author, Charlotte Patterson, who I've already mentioned, names some of these limits in extent. There remains, she suggests, a need for more longitudinal studies, by which we mean studies that follow a group of children and their lesbian and gay parents over a relatively prolonged period of time, rather than just observing them at one specific moment in time, as well as more studies of gay male parents and their developing children. She remarks in her summary that some areas such as gender development have been understudied, as have certain periods of life such as adolescence. The American Psychological Association summary also notes that some of the research has been critiqued for different methodological reasons. For example, much of the earlier studies utilized samples that were relatively small in size and not representative either of the general population of lesbian and gay parents or of the diversity within lesbian and gay parenting communities. The author suggests that these deficits are being gradually overcome as later studies emerge. Additionally, some studies have been critiqued because of shortcomings in their statistical analysis of data. Of course, the fact that a research study has some flaws and shortcomings does not mean that it is of no value or that none of its findings are trustworthy. But what it does mean is that studies often require close inspection from a methodological point of view to ascertain which of their findings are reasonably reliable and which less so. This is why professionals put such value on publications that appear in journals displaying a peer review process. Such process normally means that a study has been externally reviewed by one or more professionals familiar with the topic area and competent to evaluate the deployment of the methodology within the study. With the above said, let me contrast two summary statements relating to the impact of gay and lesbian parenting on child and adolescent development on the way to making my own evaluation of the literature. The first is a summary statement of Her Honour Justice Elizabeth Dunn in 2006 in the context of an application in the Irish High Court by a lesbian couple to have their same-sex marriage from another jurisdiction recognised in Ireland. Case in question is known in the public domain as the Zapponi-Gilligan case. The second is the summary evaluative statement of Charlotte Patterson in the American Psychological Association publication to which I've referred already. In the course of her judgment, the Irish High Court judge noted as follows: the phenomenon of parenting by same-sex couples is one of relatively recent history. The studies that have taken place are consequently of recent origin. Most of the studies have been cross-sectional studies involving small samples and frequently quite young children. I have to say, based on all the evidence I have heard on this topic, that I am not convinced such firm conclusions that children fare just as well in gay and lesbian-headed households can be drawn at this point in time. Contrast for a moment the above summary judgment with that of Patterson in her summary for the American Psychological Association. Notwithstanding the various flaws and shortcomings in some of the body of literature she reviewed, she noted the following. In summary, there is no evidence to suggest that lesbian women or gay men are unfit to be parents, or that psychosocial development among children or lesbian women or gay men is compromised relative to that among offspring of heterosexual parents. Not a single study has found children of lesbian or gay parents to be disadvantaged in any significant respect relative to children of heterosexual parents. Indeed, the evidence to date, she continues, suggests that home environments provided by lesbian and gay parents are as likely as those provided by heterosexual parents to support and enable children's psychosocial growth. When we stand back and look at the Irish High Court evaluation alongside that of the Patterson evaluation, I don't think they are fundamentally at odds with each other. My own assessment is that at this point in time, the evidence available to date bears a clear direction. In other words, it points in a particular way without allowing us to draw definitive conclusions. And I have a hunch that drawing definitive conclusions may be very difficult no matter how far we go into the future. Given that the above is roughly speaking where the evidence lies right now, we need to take one more step back and ask the following. What amount of evidence should we require in order to reach firm or definitive conclusions, if that's possible? Should arrival at firm conclusions be deferred until we have available to us a number of longitudinal studies conducted in different locations? Should these studies follow the development and well-being of individuals raised by gay and lesbian parents through their childhood and adolescence and onward to their young adulthood and perhaps through parenthood and marriage? To arrive at firm conclusions for ourselves as Irish citizens, or even firm enough conclusions for ourselves as Irish citizens, should we require that such longitudinal studies contain a sample of Irish children within their larger sample? Such questions are not easy to answer and have to be answered by each of us. And finally, if we did have findings from longitudinal studies with Irish children in their sample, would we end up having compared the lives of children of heterosexual parents, married or not, with the lives of children raised by gay and lesbian parents who remained debarred from marriage and cut off from its associated social goods throughout the dependency years of their children? No matter how hard we try, there seems to be no escape from some level of flaw and paradox. In summary, what I'm trying to say in this section is that there's a very definite limit to the amount of assistance we can expect from research in approaching our decision-making in the area of same-sex marriage, not simply because of the limited nature of the research, limits in extent, limits in quality at a moment in time, but also because the development of research in any area brings its own set of new problems and new limits. I want to come on to the final question. Do children and adolescents need both a mother and a father as parents to grow up well? I want to return to this question now and the current state of professional knowledge, what it tells us about any deficits that might arise in child and adolescent development from growing up in a family without both a mother and father on the child's parenting team. To a considerable degree, this question is already enfolded in what has been said above. However, there are specific aspects to this question that have concerned child development professionals that are worthy of mention. Concerns have arisen about the following. By comparison with their peers who are raised in households headed by heterosexual parents, do children and adolescents raised in households headed by gay and lesbian parents suffer? Do they suffer A, any impairment in the development of their sexual identity? B, do they suffer any challenges to their general personal development? Or C, do they experience challenges to the creation and maintenance of their social relationships? While acknowledging the shortage of studies of children of gay fathers, as well as some of the limitations of studies already mentioned, Patterson, on behalf of the IPA, summarises the findings of existing research by saying that with respect to the three key elements of sexual identity, namely gender identity, understood as a person's self-identification as male or female, gender role behaviour, understood as the extent to which a person's activities, occupation and the like are regarded by the culture as masculine, feminine or both, or sexual orientation, understood as a person's choice of sexual partners who may be homosexual, heterosexual or bisexual. And she concludes with respect to these matters. A, she says, no evidence appeared in any of the studies that she examined of difficulties around gender identity among children of lesbian mothers. B, she says, existing studies suggest children of lesbian mothers develop patterns of gender role behaviour much like those of other children. And finally, she says, studies of children of lesbian mothers and gay fathers do not suggest elevated rates of homosexuality. Note the confinement of the Patterson comments in A and B above to lesbian mothers and their children. My reading of her summary suggests that this confinement is due to the lack of a reasonable number of studies of gay male parents and their children, rather than to problematic findings on gender identity and gender role behaviour in any of the studies of gay male parents and their children that were examined. Similarly, with respect to the view that children and adolescents raised by gay or lesbian parents may suffer deficits in their personal development, examined in such issues as their capacity to achieve a level of separateness as individuals from their parents, psychiatric evaluations, behaviour problems, school adjustment, Patterson suggests that existing studies provide no empirical foundation for such a view. And finally, with respect to their capacity to create and maintain a set of necessary social relationships, Patterson's evaluation is that existing research suggests that children of lesbian and gay parents have positive relationships with peers and that their relationships with adults of both sexes are also satisfactory. Again, in evaluating the above evaluation, some of the same caution is required as that applied to the earlier arguments. There is a relative absence of studies of children growing up in the care of gay male parents, for example. Hence, firm conclusions are difficult to reach at this point. Nonetheless, the evidence that is there suggests that with respect to certain key aspects of child and adolescent development mentioned above, namely sexual identity, general personal development, development of social relationships, that the children in the studies reviewed showed no evidence of deficits when compared to their peers growing up in households headed by heterosexual parents. All of this suggests to me that while the evidence is far from complete, the evidence that is available is moving in a certain direction. And to conclude, this brief paper has offered some remarks and observations concerning some of the professional literature relevant to key child-focused questions embedded in the Convention's dialogue today about same-sex marriage. It has proposed a disposition of caution and limited expectation with respect to the assistance research might offer in facing decision-making in the area under consideration. It has also proposed that, notwithstanding the incapacity of existing research to yield firm conclusions, a certain direction in the existing evidence needs to be acknowledged. There are additional child-focused questions relating to the topic that cannot be explored within the confines of this short paper. Indeed, some of these questions are of recent origin and indeed have been mentioned in some of the legal papers. I will just mention some of those concerns at this point. One important question concerns the changing manner of arrival of children in gay and lesbian households. In the past, a great percentage of children, I believe, arrived in these households following the exit of one of their parents from a heterosexual relationship, which may not have been marriage, and as these same parents transitioned into a gay or lesbian relationship. This group of children usually proceeded to have some level of continuing a relationship with their two genetic biological parents. More recently, a range of developing opportunities in the field of assisted human reproduction suggest the likelihood of an increasing number of children growing up in households where only one genetic parent is involved in the child's life. I have no doubt that such particular context of childhood will be the subject of future child development research, as well as of developments in child law and of our conversation over the weekend. Thanks very much.